I want to talk today about wiring techniques for difficult side branch angulations. This is a case of severe proximal LED stenosis. We wanted here also to wire that diagonal to protect it and potentially to stent its mid lesion. The problem here is that we have two sharp angulations to get into that diagonal. We have a 90-degree angulation from left main to LAD and another one from LAD to diagonal over a short distance, two sharp angulations. So I'll describe the techniques for such wirings. First, the standard technique is to use a sharp wire band, a polymer wire. And for any wiring, the way I shape my wire is the following. I put two bands, one at the very distal tip, about 1 millimeter from the tip, and another one more proximal. The sharpness of the angle here depends on the sharpness of the angulation of the side branch, and the length of that arm here depends on the diameter of the main branch. So the larger the LAD, the larger that arm will be here. And there is a way of calculating it. So if the LAD is a 3.5 millimeters, that arm here is usually around 5 millimeters. And you can calculate it depending on the diameter of the LAD and how sharp or shallow that angle, as I show here. So if you have a sharp branch angulation, what I would do, I would put distal tip as well as another sharp band that is around 5 millimeter in length. And you can hook that side branch whether on your way in or you can go past it and hook it on the way back. You can see here we hooked it on the way in. But the key idea I want you to know about hooking it is that it's not just enough to hook it. A lot of time you hook it, then if you just push, the wire will prolapse out. So after you hook it, there is a special technique you need to follow to keep it in. So once you hook that side branch, you torque, spin the wire, and slightly pull before you push and advance. This is what we call the turning wheel technique. So after you hook it, you flip it, meaning you slightly spin it or torque the wire around with a slight pull, then you push it. This takes the resistance away from the tip and allows it to slip through. It's like after you turn a corner with your car, you spin the wheel as you keep going after the turn. And this is what we're doing here. We're flipping it and slightly pulling and pushing. If this standard technique with a standard shape fails, then the three best technique for wiring the branch are, in order of progression for me, is to put a sharper bend on the wire, 90-degree bend on the wire, or an umbrella U-shape on the wire, even without a microcatheter or dual lumen catheter. The second technique, if the first one fails, is to use a dual lumen catheter along with a sharp or U-bend on the wire. The third technique is to use the blocking balloon, and I'll describe those. Those are the three best techniques, in my opinion. There are two additional techniques that I don't like much. There is the reverse hairpin technique and the Supercross angle catheter. I will describe those as well. So this is the first one, the sharp or umbrella U-tip on the wire. So you create a longer tip, about 1 centimeter with a 90-degree bend on it, and you advance it in the coronary, and you let it knuckle on purpose. So it becomes like this, knuckled, like an umbrella U-shape. And you go past the branch and you try to hook that branch on the way back. Something like this. You go past the branch and you hook it on the way back. Alternatively, you can do an umbrella shape outside the body, or even an umbrella shape like this with a reverse tip 1 to 2 millimeter at the end. Create like an Amplatz wire outside the body. I prefer to just shape it 90 degree with close to a centimeter in length outside the body, then push it, knuckle it inside the vessel, then hook the side branch on the way back. But you can do that umbrella knuckle shape outside the body, even an Amplatz shape outside the body. And this is how it goes. You knuckle that wire, whether a 90-degree bend or an umbrella U-shape. You advance it, pass the branch, and then you hook that branch on the way back. Then after you hook it, as I explained, don't just push, it will prolapse out. You hook it, then you flip it, spin it slightly with a slight pull, then you push to take the resistance away from the tip. Now, if this technique fails, the second technique is to use a dual lumen catheter along with that sharp or U-bend on the wire. And this is a reminder of the dual lumen catheter. This is a Sasuke catheter. And what it consists of, you have a wire already into your main branch. You advance the Sasuke catheter over it, and that wire will come out from the monorail RX port. Then you advance that Sasuke catheter over your main branch wire, which is coming out from the monorail port. You advance it in a monorail fashion. Then when you get close to the side branch, you advance another wire via the over-the-wire port, and that over-the-wire port will come out of the side port inside the vessel. And there is usually a radio opaque marker that indicates to you where is that side port, where the wire will come out. And the wire you advance through that over-the-wire side port, you shape it in a sharp bend or even an umbrella U-shaped bend. And this is an illustration why a dual lumen catheter is better than using a single lumen catheter. You can do that same technique using a single lumen catheter, an over-the-wire single lumen catheter. But a dual lumen catheter is more effective for the following reason. This is a single lumen catheter. We're advancing through it a sharply bent wire. Pushing the wire into the side branch will kick the catheter away. It will prolapse away. It doesn't give you enough support to push through a sharply angled branch. Conversely, a dual lumen catheter, you have that distal monorail wire that provides stability to the catheter. It provides more weight to the system. It keeps it robustly in place and stable, so much so that as you're trying to push that side branch wire, especially with a sharp, difficult angle, the whole system will remain stable and supportive and will not prolapse eccentrically. You will be able to push your wire, as you may see here. This is an illustration of a case of severe ostial left circumflex stenosis into the distal left main. After we stented from the left main to the left circumflex, we needed to rewire the LAD. We could not rewire it using a standard technique, so I used a Sasuke double lumen catheter. We advanced the Sasuke over the left circumflex wire in a monorail fashion. Then through the over-the-wire side port, we advance another polymer wire, sharply bent, and you can see here, we were able to wire the LAD. It was difficult to wire the LED because there were multiple bends proximally. But we were able to do so because the Sasuke system provided robustness and stability and prevented the wire from prolapsing back. See the dot of the Sasuke catheter, which indicates to you where over-the-wire side port is exactly. If those two techniques fail, then you can use the blocking balloon technique. Here is what blocking balloon is. So let's say you want to wire that diagonal. You inflate a balloon in the LAD past the diagonal branch, then that balloon will block the LAD and the wire will preferentially go into the side branch. However, there are problems with this technique. One, you don't want to injure the LAD by inflating the balloon. Number two, you may get plaque shift as you're inflating that balloon in the LAD and cause occlusion of the diagonal and make it even more difficult to wire. This is an illustration of a case of severe LAD stenosis. Upon trying to wire the LAD, the wire kept going preferentially into the septal, and the operator could not wire that tight LAD. So what he did here, he wired the septal, he inflated the blocking balloon into the septal, and was subsequently able to wire the LAD past the septal. This is another case I did. This is a vein graft to diagonal, and it's feeding antegrade and retrograde portion of that diagonal. Our wire wanted to go preferentially into the retrograde portion. We could not wire the tight antegrade portion of the diagonal. So what I used here to wire it, I used the blocking balloon. So over the retrograde wire, I inflated a balloon in the retrograde arm, and using a polymer wire, I crossed into the antegrade arm. And you can see it here being done. We then eventually dilated antegradely and retrogradely, and we stented retrogradely with a wire protecting the antegrade arm. Now, if those three techniques fail, there are two additional techniques that may be tried, but those two techniques may be more difficult to implement and may cause more injury to the main vessel. The first technique is the reverse hairpin technique. And this is what it means. It means you make a big U shape on the wire, not the 1 centimeter I described. It's a 3 to 5 centimeter tip with another reverse band at that tip. So it's kind of an amplatz shape, but a large amplatz shape, 3 to 5 centimeter band with another reverse band at the very tip. And you advance it into the main branch past the lesion. Then you try to hook the lesion on the way back. You pull it back and you try to hook the lesion on the way back. And once you hook the lesion on the way back, you do what we described, the turning wheel technique, meaning you torque it and pull a little bit, then advance it. And you use a polymer wire for this technique, as with all the techniques I've described. Hypothetically, the reverse hairpin technique looks nice. However, it's difficult to implement because you cannot advance such a large angled wire in the coronary. It will not advance to your target, or it will injure the vessel. So the way you advance the reverse hairpin is that you shape that wire outside the body with a needle introducer. Then you need to straighten that wire with that needle introducer and advance it via a microcatheter, the back end of the microcatheter, or the over-the-wire portion of a dual lumen catheter that is positioned adjacent to the branch you want to wire. Even some people have described shaping the reverse hairpin using a dual lumen catheter outside the body and pushing that reverse hairpin in parallel alongside the dual lumen catheter. And I'll describe exactly what they have described, which is you have a wire into the main branch, okay, that blue wire, this blue wire here. You start advancing a dual lumen catheter over it via the monorail portion. And while that dual lumen catheter is still outside the body, and through the over-the-wire back port, you advance a polymer wire, and you shape it outside the body, outside that TUI. You shape it, you create that 3 to 5 centimeter bend and another reverse bend. Then you push simultaneously the dual lumen catheter as well as that reverse hairpin through the TUI, through the guide, and into the coronary, while that reverse hairpin is protruding alongside the dual lumen catheter. Then, once that reverse hairpin reaches past the side branch level, you pull it and you hook the side branch as we described. Then the last technique is using the Supercross angle catheter. The Supercross can come in various angles, 45 to 120 degrees. The problem with the Supercross catheter is that it's a stiff catheter. It may injure the vessel, and there is a special way of advancing it to the side branch. So you advance it over the stiff portion of the wire that's in the main branch in order to keep the tip straight and prevent it from injuring the vessel. Now, once you get that catheter around the side branch ostium, then you pull the wire until the soft portion of the wire, and you allow that microcatheter to shape into its sharp angle. And this is an illustration of that. So you pull the wire to the soft portion, and then now the catheter shape. You have to keep it straightened by the stiff portion of the wire as you're advancing it. Otherwise, you can injure the vessel, you can injure the left main. Another problem with it, not only is it difficult to advance, and you have to advance it while it's straightened by the wire, it can also fool you. Remember, we're working in three-dimensional space. So even if that microcatheter seems to be looking in the direction of the side branch, it may be adjacent to it, not in it. It's a stiff catheter, and even when it points to the side branch in 2D imaging, it may still be out of plane. And when it is out of plane, it does not help you more than a regular catheter. In fact, it may hinder you because it's so stiff and forces the wire to go in one eccentric direction away from the true side branch. So you have to keep torquing it. And torque often does not transmit unless you advance and pull the catheter. And as you advance and pull the catheter to transmit the torque, you may injure the vessel. Therefore, you may have to re-advance the wire distally to straighten the catheter. Each time you want to change the Supercross orientation, so it's bulky, it can injure the vessel, it's difficult to use, and each time you want to advance and re-advance the catheter, you have to re-advance the wire, straighten the catheter, then pull the wire and torque it as you're pulling. Another catheter that is as bulky is the Venture catheter, which is a catheter with a tip that is steerable from outside the body. Again, it's a stiff tip, and it can be difficult to handle. Another idea is how to deal with wire prolapse when it keeps happening. This is a case of a patient who's coming with inferoposterior STEMI. He has a tight distal circumflex stenosis. Now, the issue is how to get to that stenosis. We have so many angles here. We have one reverse 140-degree angle from the left main to the circ. Then we have another 90-degree angle here on the proximal circ, then another 90-degree angle. So we have three very sharp bends to cross. And here we initially started with a sharp BMW wire, and we placed a sharp bend on that BMW wire, which allowed us to get into the circumflex. However, the wire kept prolapsing out of the circumflex. The first thing is to switch to a polymer wire. The polymer wire is softer and more slippery and it's less likely to prolapse. So we tried the whisper wire, but it kept having the same issue. It kept prolapsing out of the circ into that ramus, the path of least resistance. We tried multiple times, hook it, then flip it, then push it. It did not work. Then we tried with a dual lumen catheter. That's the second technique. So the first technique with a polymer wire is hook it and flip it while slightly pulling the turning wheel. Second technique is dual lumen catheter. Third technique is to put a blocking balloon into that ramus, but you don't want to do that and injure a very healthy and large ramus. The fourth technique is to use Supercross, which is again bulky and difficult to use, but it may be favorable here in this very large vessel. Supercross is easier to use and less likely to injure a vessel when the vessel is large. So we did the dual lumen catheter technique, and you see here the black dot. This is the exit port for the over-the-wire side wiring. The reason we're using it here is mainly to provide support and robustness to prevent prolapse. And you can see here, we wired the circ again. Now we're trying to get through that band, and as we're trying to get through it, we prolapsed out again, despite the support of the Sasuke catheter. So you can see here, we tried again, and with more finesse turning wheel across the second bend, we were able to cross it. And the finesse in the turning wheel is a slighter torque and slighter pull before you eventually push. And we were able to get through it without prolapse. And we eventually treated the distal subtotal occlusion. And notice across those bends, we have a severe lesion here. This could be a dissection that you created during difficult wiring, but keep in mind those sharp bends, you get pseudo lesions. So we pulled the wire all the way to the soft portion across that area, and we see that this is actually a pseudo lesion. That's how that area looked before our maneuvers. So you may not need to stand that area.